It's not just machines, it's people. It's highly trained, highly skilled artists across all different disciplines who've spent years refining their craft. So like the people are the most important thing. When you look at those credits and you see a mile long visual effects credits, that is sometimes not the entire, in fact, a lot of times not the entire crew, because you're only allowed a certain amount of people you can put on based on the number of shots you've done a lot of times. So,
I didn't know that.
You might not be seeing the entire thing, and that visual effects credit in a lot of shows is going to be pretty lengthy. So there's a ton of people from, PAs to coordinators to producers to IT infrastructure. It takes an army of IT to make sure that we can do the work, because we're using a lot of computing power. But what drives that is the people who are both have a technical brain and a creative mind to be able to understand I know what I got to get to. How do we get there technically?
Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon is a podcast on directing for anybody that's quite simply ever watched anything. Pete converses with a wide range of fellow directors, writers, actors, showrunners, producers, executives, and more on a journey to determine just what makes a good director and why we'll always need stories. Visit www.petechatmon.com to get your official director's chair wear, hoodies, hats, jackets, mugs, and other swag, and learn more about your host.
All right, folks, welcome to episode 47 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. Our star today in this VIP special craft episode is none other than Brian Kubovcik of VFX. Now, this is for those of you who it's for everybody, but those of you maybe haven't done a lot of VFX work, or maybe you've dabbled in it and want to learn more. I just wanted to rap with Brian about how things work in the VFX world, what a VFX supervisor is looking for, how to best communicate with them, some of the technology, just what goes into that dynamic and that relationship. So I hope you enjoy. I think it's a really fun combo. I learned a lot, and it's one of those nuts and bolts things that we like to do here on the podcast. In other news, it is, at the time of this recording, it is May 16th. The pod will drop on May 17th, and we are about to enter the conclusion of week 1 of negotiations for the DGA. Obviously, the writers have been on strike since the beginning of the month. No news to report for the DGA side of things, and there will be no news because any good negotiation is kind of anchored by a closed room of conversation where folks can do what they need as they negotiate. And I'm sure when we hear something, we'll know what's up. So that's how it goes. But I am happy to see, all the writers that I know are doing their business, and they've been on strike. They've been picketing. They've been hitting up different studios, usually the studio that is closest to where they live. But it's great seeing the support and the volume of writers out there campaigning and fighting for a fair contract. So, I feel like we're in a holding pattern for information, and we shall see how it all pans out. The irony of all of this going on is today is the television upfronts, and we're seeing new shows that are, being greenlit to go to series in a world where there are not writers to write them. But I think that kind of speaks to I hesitate to, the word choice really becomes specific, but that kind of speaks to perhaps the foregone conclusion of a deal being reached at some point, which is true. I mean, television and film is not going to go away, but we shall see how it all works out. So again, we just ask that everybody be patient for a fair deal to be brokered, and we continue to stand with the writers as they fight for their fair deal, and we will see what happens with the DGA, and then after that with SAG-AFTRA, which will begin their negotiations in June on the 7th, to be exact. Other than that, nothing real to report from my end on the production end. I can say that I delivered the director's cut for my episode of Interior Chinatown. And it's one of the I almost want to say I'm most proud of this director's cut and of all the episodes I've done. And the reason being that the show is very specific. The showrunners and producers, Elsie Choi, Charles Yu, who wrote the book, he's a showrunner, Mira Kite from Participant, Elsie's from Ryback, they were really looking for a director to interpret the script and left room for a great deal of collaboration and imagination. And for me personally, that's where I really feel like I can offer my best work and expand and enhance, in a collaborative fashion, what was dreamt up on the page. So really happy about what we pulled off and can't wait for folks to see it whenever that will be. And in the meantime, trying to work on my own ideas, get back to developing and writing for myself and handling daddy duty while my wife is on a press tour in New York. This morning, she was on The View and she's got some more press coming up. So real dope to see her, getting a lot of messages from friends with videos of, oh, look at Kelly. So I feel like that's dope. I'm super excited and proud. And as I've said before, can't wait to see what she does next in her beautiful career with her amazing talent. But with that, let's get into episode 47 with Brian Kubovcik from Future Of VFX and see what a VFX supervisor gets into in this craft episode from Let's Shoot with Pete Chapman.
Roll sound. Speed.
The interview. Take one.
All right. So we're welcoming Brian Kubovcik to the podcast. And this is one of those craft episodes that I am happy to do. I'm going to be very excited to learn today from Brian. But let's dive in. We're going to get into your world as a VFX supervisor. So
thanks for
welcome
having
to
me.
the pod.
Appreciate
Thanks
you.
for being. So I'm thinking, man, it remind me if did I meet you on Blacklist when I was shadowing?
Yeah, it was like 2015.
2015, shadowing on Blacklist. That was the first, that was the second show I ever shadowed. Thank you to the Sony program. I was in there for comedy, but I ended up shadowing the Blacklist.
Yeah, and you get everything in the Blacklist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, let's kind of, before we dive into all the craft of it all, where are you from? How'd you find your way into this world of storytelling?
So I originally from Virginia, North Carolina area, and went to school for philosophy and religion. And instead of writing a paper at the end of my studies, I decided to make a short film. And my teacher didn't know how to take that. Like no one's ever done that because I was just sick of writing papers, and put together a short film with a friend of mine. Started getting into editing from there, then ended up relocating to New York and starting out a boutique editorial shop in New York City that did mostly commercials, music videos, and worked my way up from the machine room to assistant editor. And then they got what's called a Flame, which is an Autodesk product. And they said, hey, will you take care of this data management? And I was like, sure. A couple extra shekels. And I was like, all right, I'm down. And so at night I would just sit there, get the data management done. And then I'd put together the script, like the actual work that the artist was there doing that day. I'd rebuild it myself, just kind of using the template. Started getting into visual effects and then decided that's my thing.
Were you doing that? Was that like on your own? Like, so you could learn, kind of reverse engineer what they were doing?
Yeah. And so I was an assistant editor at the time, but then that piqued my interest and then jumped into visual effects head on and worked my way through that from about 2008 through 15. Started getting into set work for commercials, and then Future FX, which is a company I worked for, they contacted me in 2014, 2015, somewhere in there, to come in as a VFX suit because I had been out on set quite a bit for commercials, and it was actually the Blacklist I came in for. So I met you right as I was starting in Episodic World.
Wow. Okay. Now I have two little questions along the way. What was the short film about that you did? Because did it merge your major and into like the narrative, or like what was the design of what you did?
It did. It's pretty dark, but my capstone class was on the biblical apocalypse. So it was like studying about, different religions, end of world stories.
Mhm.
And so, specific story beats and how it relates to numerology and all sorts of crazy ideas. And so I ended up spending about a year watching televangelists on TV talking about the end of the world. Pretty dark place to be in, but then piece it all together as if you were watching this all play down, one after another, like static popping up between. So I hit all the story beats that I needed to for the studies,
Right.
but made it entertaining and engaging. And so, and ended up just kind of realizing, I can tell stories too.
Was
And that
the
was my first step
professor
for it.
was the professor impressed?
Yeah, got the A.
Okay. Got the A.
Got the A. Yeah.
And then the other question I have for you, was this something that you had been wanting to do, like make short films or tell visual stories, or like how did you have the inkling to move in that direction to get the grade in that course?
I think that I've always kind of viewed myself as a creative person first and
Mhm.
foremost. And, whether it's music or visual storytelling or, writing, it's all just, those are just tools in the toolbox.
Right.
And so I fell in love with music first and pursued that. But then, by doing that project, that was where I really realized, this is another tool in the toolbox that I can add. So kind of just building up all these different skills and understanding different aesthetics and, different genres within music kind of informed the way I approach visual storytelling, understanding different genres there. It's just kind of you sponge up as much as you can over time.
Right. Right. All right. So let's get into it, man. I was saying before we hopped on, or before I hit record, that I probably could have talked to you sometime before January 17th when I started prep on the finale for Dead Boy Detectives, which was an HBO Max show when I started, and when I wrapped, it's a Netflix show, but it comes from a DC comic book, Neil Gaiman Sandman series, and the finale had a lot of stuff. I'll be vague because I don't want to step on anything, but like, what stunts with wire pulls, a lot of green screen, and some explosions and whatnot. So I'm gonna kind of probably hop in with specific questions that kind of I've taken from that journey. But like when you get an episode of TV, since that's where we're kind of living right now in this combo, like what do you do first as the VFX supervisor?
So I'll, break down a script and I'll usually start by reading, the action first, just to kind of paint the picture of where we're at and what's the broad strokes. And then once I've made it through there, I will go back and read the dialogue again. That's just my own personal process of doing that. Because then once I know kind of the players in the story, I can then kind of build what their personality is, and that can inform visual effects. But the fastest way for me to kind of understand the scope in terms of being a department head is, what do I think is going to be visual effects based on my experience, and what can the budget of the show bear, and where do we want to place the visual effects dollars, and get the best creative in the places that matter the most.
Interesting. So it seems to me that it's important that screenplays are properly formatted, right? Because like if it seems like maybe it wouldn't happen that often, but sometimes like I'll read something and it will be unclear of whether or not this is actually in the scene. And so I was wondering if that happens when you read on that first dialogue pass. Have you found that some VFX categorized events are being tucked in dialogue, like, and not properly carved out ever?
Yeah, I mean, it can be as simple as a phone comp if it's not listed as like someone's got their phone up, but someone says like, let me text this person. Oh,
Right.
okay, that actually might be someone pulling it up there, but we just don't have the action dialogue. So it's kind of a two-step process that
Right.
dialogue informs it, but I think that the action beats speak to it right away as to what are the big things for me to focus on to make sure the director's vision is carried out, as best as possible.
Right. So that's for all the writers, make sure you are properly formatting your scripts. I mean, like my wife was doing a read for something and we were kind of going back and forth. I was like, it sounds to me like there's a baby in this scene, but it was a bit of a diversion. And there is a way where you could write like what appears to be a baby, but it was kind of written as baby. And so I'm knowing when I see something in caps, I'm like, it's in the scene, you know, and that can really take you on the wrong path. What's the difference for you? Because you're talking about a show where you know the budget. What if it's you're being approached to come on to the show and present what that budget might look like? Like, is a show saying, here's what we want to spend? Or are they saying, Brian, here's the pilot and here's what we're, are they looking for you to kind of present an estimate?
Well, yeah, usually the way it'll go down, I'm a vendor side supervisor, so I work for a company, and there's two different kind of worlds. There's the independent supervisor who goes all the way through post, and there's multiple vendors working on it. Whereas myself, I'm a vendor side supervisor where I'll see it through, and I've built a team of visual effects artists who are going to carry it out. So I will always put together a bid with it, but I first and foremost will lead with creative. I'll probably read it and understand what the story is, and then do a creative deck based on based on the script that has some stills, some like really great concepts that kind of speak to the story beats and how visual effects could play a role in that. Whether it's, live, whether it's links with motion video or just stills, I start creative first and then send that along with a bid. And the bid is, you see what's up. You're just trying to, throw something at the wall and make some assumptions. Right. And then you do your best to try to understand, okay, who are the players in it? How big do we think this is? And then that will support it. If I see that there's if there's a Godzilla in the scene coming through, that's definitely visual effects. And I know they got to have some money to do that. Right. But it just depends on the show. But I always lead with creative and come with ideas.
Okay. And so in this stage, who are most of your conversations with, I guess, on the side of the show?
It'll be, it's usually a joint conversation with the directors, line producer, and the studio. And it might not all happen in one room. It might be multiple meetings. It's just kind of a meet and greet if it's not an existing relationship where I've worked with this crew before. And just, talking to them and telling them who I am and what we can bring to the table. Because, throughout our entire company, we can bring a lot of resources to bear. So if the pressure point is, hey, we got to create this show and get it on air in 6 months, and there's a bunch of visual effects, well, that's going to inform like, okay, how do we put together a plan to accomplish the work? Like there's the creative side of it, but then there's the execution. So how do we figure all that out? So at the beginning, I'm trying to map out what the course of action is to make everyone feel like we're going to get this done. It's going to look great because that's what we do.
Right. So I guess let's build an imaginary scenario so then we can kind of like move like down the assembly line here. In this world where the budget's already been determined, obviously there's some wiggle room episode to episode. Well, let me not say obviously. Is the show working with a pot of money that they would love to split evenly, but they are making some adjustments as needed per script?
Yeah, I think that especially if it's a new series, you want to come out with a bang and come out swinging on the first one. So it might come in with more visual effects needed that are planned. Let's say, because there's kind of two different things. There's the planned visual effects and there's the unplanned visual effects.
What are some examples of that?
A Godzilla walking through the scene, got to be a planned visual effect. Right. Shooting a dolly move in an old town, and you got window, and you see dolly grip camera operator, and so rebuilding that whole town scene behind them to get rid of them. That's the unplanned stuff, and you call that out on the day of like, hey, can we maybe just like kind of go 3/4 angle here and maybe loosen that? But a lot of times it's just there's the weighing on set of like. You speak up and you say, hey, this would be ideal to not do that, but ultimately it's not my decision. I'm there in service of the story, in service of the director. And then, just saying this, it would cost a little bit less if we didn't see the windows.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it really does help for, obviously, like you've got someone there on set to help point these things out, but it really does help for the filmmaking team to have an understanding of that. So you don't have to tap on their shoulder every 20 minutes about something that's going to be a financial, expense.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that, most people see it, but we've all been in those situations where we got to shoot. And, you need to get the shot to whether you're losing light or you're running out of time in the day, those
Right.
things will happen. And so, I try to make sure that we're the creative voice for carrying out the visual effects and not be the person that's like, well, the budget, because nobody wants to hear that when you're in the trenches and you're making a film. It's like, no, we got that. We'll figure it out later.
Right.
We got you. Do your thing. We know it's going to cost more to keep this crew of 200 people here an extra 25 minutes to figure out a different camera angle than it is
Right.
for me and my team to go in and clean this up for maybe, if it makes it into the cut, a second.
Right. So you've broken down the script. You've made your idea of like how many shots are going to be needed. How are you doing that? Are you taking the language of the show and kind of making assumptions based off of like how you think the show would want these moments covered?
Yeah, I think it's getting a feel for who the director is in those moments. That's not always the way it goes. But yeah, it's making an assumption kind of just based on the experience of being on set for so many years and seeing, small budget to very big budget being created and trying to get a sense for what it is. So, if it's a green screen driving scene, I'm going to count every time someone's got a line inside the car. So that's how I figure out the cuts for that. But, a creature walking through there, that could be one shot. It could end up being 13. It depends on, just breaking down a script. It's really hard to tell that stuff unless there's very specific beats like this cheetah jumps on this person. So it's just a guesstimate. And then once you start getting the actual, departmental meetings, you start refining what's what. That's when you start to get a clearer picture. But to land the job, it's a lot of assumptions and just being malleable and just saying like, I'm making this assumption here. I don't know if that's the thing, but I'm open to anything. We can figure it out, and just being a good team player, a good creative partner.
Yeah, that was the part that was new to me on the show that I did, because that first budget was presented. It's got every single moment identified where it's for certain. Like you said, it's Godzilla, and here's how I'm going to shoot that. Like it kind of flips your preparation in a way. But while in the time between, let's say, that first budget being presented to the production team during prep, and then, the director mulling things over and trying to figure out what they're going to do, what are you and your team doing in the interim when you're waiting for some more like specificity on how many shots it will be, or whether or not it'll be green screen, or, hey, I'm not even going to put a camera on that. I'm going to let that play off camera. Like, what are you guys doing at that point?
It can be any number of things. It could be doing concept imagery. Like, let's say we've got some creature that isn't of this world. We got to start figuring stuff out. If we're on the show, like, we got to get going. We got to get cracking. We got to figure this out. At least that being that creative partner, developing concept imagery, doing some previs, even if it's grayscale previs to help inform camera movement, which, informs the creative and the way we're telling the story, to then also affects the bid and how we would adjust. How much of this world do we see that we need to create? Because oftentimes it's just one piece of foreground with one actor, and then we're building the whole world behind it.
Right. What are some general, for someone who maybe doesn't fully, I don't want to say fully understand it, but maybe is new to the world of what you do, what are some, like, I don't know, like some basic principles that you could share that might help them understand how to best collaborate with you?
I think for me, it's about communication and just to reach out and don't be afraid. Like, whether or not you have the knowledge of it, like, that's not a director's job. The director's job is not to understand every facet of visual effects. The director's job is to say, hey, this is my vision, and this is what I think I want the camera to be doing. And from there, we understand what the pieces are to that, and then we'll explain that. So I think it's just about being open to communication and early communication. I think that the shows that are most successful that have effects in it is like, viewing it not as the just someone who's going to be on set and say whether or not something's working or not, but an actual creative partner is going to see it all the way through, because we're one of the few departments that is actually take it from script all the way to the screen.
Right.
So after we're done shooting and the pieces, fall in the edit, and you now come up with a different idea, you still want to have that shorthand with that person. Like, remember we talking about Godzilla there? I think it's actually just this giant pterodactyl.
Right.
Right. And so having that relationship built is important. So that starts really early on. So I think that's the first thing. In terms of technical stuff on set, I think it's just, if you're not comfortable with VFX, again, it's just, hey, if you have a question, is it okay if I shoot this? And then oftentimes, if it's going to mean that we have to add a big CG moment to the scene, I might say, well, it's not really what we're after here, but we can talk about it. But I think that if we got time ticking, I would try to just reframe the camera. And if and then just trusting that person has the best interests of the show at heart, because they might be saying no to this new ask because they know that the money that would cost has already been put to this other big thing that we really need to tell the story that we can't do in camera.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's protecting the things that you're after.
Right. Are you fully aware of the budget at all times, or are you kind of, I'll say, from the variety of different shows that I've done, and not even VFX specific, sometimes you're kind of trying to get a sense of what's there. And sometimes you're like, oh, you got more than I think, and it might just be a little something that kind of makes you raise your eyebrow and recognize oh, I can do that. They don't necessarily want to do it, or it's not it's not, they might be satisfied with less, but this would be a great way to tell the story, and they can absorb it, but they've just made it very cryptic that the money is there. Do you have to walk that line as well?
A little bit, yeah. And there's oftentimes if we're serving in a vendor capacity only, and there's an independent supervisor, we don't know the overall budget. We'll oftentimes get sent something after it's shot and say, hey, can you budget this? And then we'll send it back, and we don't know the full budget of the show. But in the case of being the vendor side supervisor, where we see it from script to screen for all the episodes, we're developing that budget along. We might not know the full pot that's there, but we know what we've bid, and that's what we have to stay within, at least in the shooting moment. So that's the time when we know it, and that's us doing right by our studio partners, and making sure we're not blowing up the budget and creating stuff that we're not planning for. So it's being creative partners to the creatives on set, but also the people at the studio who have helped make the show and made it possible. So.
Have you had any experiences where a director's kind of running off the rails in terms of being realistic about what they have the capacity to do in collaboration with you and your team? And if so, who is most responsible, or who was responsible for kind of having that conversation to rein things in and get it back into the pocket of what the show does?
In my experience, it's typically going to be the line producer. You present a bid and say, this is the full buffet of visual effects that we've talked about. Now we all know that that's not exactly what's going to end up being shot. We all know that's not what is going to end up in the edit, but this is what we know at this moment. So you present that snapshot in time, and the line producer will take that and go, okay, I've got all these different departmental budgets. I got to figure out how to Jenga everything together and figure out where can we want to really sell this fully digital environment. We need that. So where can we find, it's not necessarily in visual effects budget, it might be in other departments, or we've got a giant explosion that we want to do practically. And so we don't want to do any visual effects on it, even though we'll oftentimes, remove the special effects reading, maybe enhance a little bit. They'll say, okay, we're going to make that small for visual effects, and we'll just do enhancements, and it will be a primarily practical effect. So it's always a kind of a, just a moment to just be, like I said, malleable and say, okay, tell us what you need from us. and we will make the best plan to make it look great.
Right. So without me hopping in and hopping out, like what more can you tell us about the process moving forward from kind of where we've landed so far, from the prep to the initial prep, from receiving the script, kind of early meetings, like kind of run me through what happens next from your side of things.
From there, it's like, look at that one-liner, start planning out your days. What are the elements we need on set, and what's going to be us in visual effects? Letting your AD team know that if we got to scan something, lining up vendors to come in and make digital representations of a set or one of the actors or a prop. So lining up all that, getting it ready to go. And that, I have done that myself. It also falls to coordinators who are on the show, visual effects coordinators. And, just prepping for that shoot, being as prepared as possible, understand the boards. What are we after? Just as much prep as possible, then go into the day. On set, we are capturing as much data as possible. So tons of reference photography, tons of camera data.
Is that what's LiDAR?
LiDAR is the scanning, yeah.
Okay. And what does that stand for?
Light infrared detection and ranging. I always forget it off the top of my head, but it's shooting fancy lasers around. It's like echolocation, but for visuals. So imagine the way the dolphin pings out and gets information back. It's basically sending something. It's sending a light out to it and receiving it back, and then it builds a 3D representation of where you're at.
Gotcha. And another term I heard a lot was SRDI. Oh God, it was some kind of photo that was taken.
HDRI.
HDRI. There you go. And what's that? High definition.
Yeah, high dynamic range imagery. So we're taking usually on a fisheye, an 8 mil. We'll shoot all the angles, including up. And we'll do, 3 to 5, maybe more than that brackets, depending on how many. So you're shooting the darkest darks to the lightest lights. You get all that information in between, and you get a full dome. So you take that dome, and let's say, you've got a scan of the physical set you're in,
right? And
we want to place a Godzilla right here. Well, I'm going to go shoot an HDR right there, so that when we need to light that CG creature, all of that imagery goes into it. So all of the detail in the eye that you get close up on Godzilla's eye, we need to see out there to the river or wherever Godzilla's messing up, and you get all that detail information of either the location you're actually at or some other place that you need to be. But it's helpful for understanding where the set lights, where's the sun, because all that stuff, lighting is one of the most important things, especially for CG. So it's that moment in time to capture that and understand how we're going to light this object.
So it's like a photoreal representation of what it should look like. So if you are creating or enhancing, you're keeping it's true to what it should feel like.
Yeah, it's a visual representation that we actually use to light the objects. And so we're feeding the color temperature of the sun onto that at the right direction, because if you get a certain, like a harsh shadow behind them and all of a sudden your light's over here on the creature, well, that's going to give it away. So you have to have it in the right position. And that's just, that's part of the data that's captured. We also, in VFX have to have a really fundamental understanding of how cameras work. Right. Because we work with so many different cameras, and like, what are the lens dynamics? How far is that? How big is that sensor? What's the crop we're using? Right. Because all that informs, like, when you have a camera moving on set and Godzilla's got to go in there, we need to rebuild that camera in the 3D representation called camera tracking, so that we can place that thing in there so it moves properly in set, and then the HDR lights it so that it looks properly within the scene. There's just a lot of technical stuff that happens on the day, and that's why you'll see a small visual effects army on a lot of productions.
And one more question about that before we get into the army. When you're actually doing that work in post, are you like able to input specific focal lengths and whatnot, and that's how you're able to, like, that's what you're saying when you need to know what a lens does, so you can input, it's a 35 millimeter, this is our f-stop, and you can really almost treat the digital space as if it's being filmed by a camera?
Yeah, I think it's not even thinking about it like we're not even thinking that it's separated. We're trying to recreate what's happening in the real world, like through a camera, through what's happening. And so understanding how that set was placed, like what are the dimensions is where LiDAR comes in. And how do we light it properly, and what's the camera doing? All that, it's based in real life, and that's what our ultimate goal is, to make it photo real, so that the viewer goes, "Was that visual effects?"
Right.
Obviously, we know certain creatures are not of this world, but there's lots of things that you'd see and you'd have no idea.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Now that I never thought about it that way. So this explanation is super crisp, and it's amazing now too. Like how many things, like you're saying, like the most basic of a scene could be the volume. It could have a high degree of visual effects, and it's just like there's so many different reasons why that decision's being made to capture it in that particular way.
Hi, I'm Shiri Appleby. You may know me as Liz Parker from Roswell. I've also directed episodes of Imprisoned, Minx, Young Sheldon, and you are listening to Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon.
Transitions, a director's journey and motivational handbook, is Pete Chatmon's book from Michael Weasley Productions. What started in 1993 has been a marathon of persistence and creative pivots, transitioning from indie filmmaker to teaching at NYU's acclaimed film school, to running a production company, to directing television and commercials, and ultimately eyeing a return to the feature films that gave him his start. A mixture of how-to, self-help, and inspiration. This book is for any person targeting a successful career in the creative arts. Transitions, a director's journey and motivational handbook from Michael Weasley Productions, is available on Amazon and anywhere else you get your books. Don't forget about your local mom and pop shops, people.
Who is in your army, right? So like on those days, if you could paint the picture of like when you've got your team at full capacity, like kind of who are those people and what are they doing?
You've got a visual effects supervisor who is standing with the director and the DOP and making sure that, that we're all looking at the same thing. We're all making sure we're understanding the creative, and because it'll shift on the day. It always does.
Right.
And so just being that resource and talking about what the ultimate goal is, that's what the supervisor's role is in that moment. But also, and there's a visual effects producer a lot of times on set who is, taking notes about how a certain scene went, to, have some real-time reporting of, okay, this is what we budgeted. Here's the things that got added.
Right.
You have a team of data wranglers, have a senior wrangler who might lead a smaller team. We have outside vendors who do LiDAR. And that might be, they pull up with a scan truck and you send all the actors through in costume and they get their picture taken and we create a 3D model of them. And then people who are out there with the LiDAR scanners that spin around and they're seeing the environment and recording that. VFX PAs who do, a pretty similar job to, set PAs, but for the visual effects world, just very specific things. Hey, I need an SD card. Can you run and get that?
Right.
Those sorts of things helping the wrangling team. That's on the bigger productions.
Right.
For me, on a TV show, you oftentimes don't get that luxury. So it might just be me. And so I have to figure out how to creatively capture the things I need to,
right,
but make sure that everyone's getting taken care of. And oftentimes, I'll lean into make sure the creative's taken care of, and I will get the data as best I can. And I have ways of doing it. You'll see me hustling around set.
Those are the days you have a camera around your neck. You got some media cards in your back pocket.
Yep. So it just depends on the production. Like I've worked on small stuff to big stuff. They all are their own animal, just like every production. And I enjoy them all in their own specific ways.
Right. Very diplomatic. So when we get to post, now what's the world look like? Obviously there was the budget. Then the director said, "Oh, I can do that in five cuts. I don't need 8." And then they shoot it, and somebody made a list of like, looks like they're adding coverage in here. Now it's it's 10 cuts to make it work. But like once you get to post and you're dealing with the reality of what you've got, right, and what you're marrying the effects to, how does that process unfold?
I think it's informed by the day. Like those set reports kind of give an indication of where things are headed. and that's sent to the editorial team, and starting to build that relationship with the post team and the post producer. And then the director continues on through in certain instances. I'm sure you've experienced where you go shoot, and then as the director, and then you get your one cut, and then all of a sudden you show up, you see it on there. It's like, well, that's not the cut I thought it was going to be.
Right.
So it just depends on the production, but it's really about that editorial team and vibing with them, because so much of what we do has to get funneled back through them. So making sure all the technical stuff is right. So as we start getting turnovers, we'll do round trip tests to start, just to make sure all the technical specificity is locked down. We're good to go. So that as we're like really starting to get to the work, we don't have to continually think about, oh, well, this is actually technically incorrect, or the aspect ratio is wrong, or the delivery on this file format's wrong. So that's the first step. Like, let's just get the tech out of the way. And then we'll do spotting sessions, whether that's with an independent visual effects supervisor when we're the vendor, or where we are the vendor side soup, we're talking to the director, or we're talking to the editor. We'll do a spotting session where we'll go through things and talk about, okay, they've got shots labeled. We'll say, all right, you want to add Godzilla in this scene. What does Godzilla need to do? Because I see this car getting crunched.
Right.
Are we still doing that? Is that still caused by his feet, or is that a missile now? Like whatever the idea might have changed into that we don't know in that editorial phase.
Right.
And to be clear, I've never worked on Godzilla, but phone me.
It's a great reference though. Everybody knows what.
Yeah.
Like when you said it, I was like, I know what the needs are for that. You know, I know what that looks like in the final stage. Speaking of final stage, do different shows have a different philosophy around how far the effects should be as you move through like director's cut to network cut? Because there are some shows I've done where it's like it's a placeholder, or it might even just be like a card. And then there are others where I've had like very early passes, so there's an idea, like a reference to kind of look at, but it's not, the creature's not going to look like that. Like, who is that driven by, or like, how do you land on that?
That'll typically be driven by us. Like, we'll know, okay, we've made it through. Let's get some grayscale blocking together. If it's just a card that says like Godzilla stomps on car here, and that's a fully CG shot of a city and everything, there's nothing that was shot practically. That would definitely be one where we're doing that probably as production's happening, if not like well before then, to inform the story, but just to provide that to editorial, to have a slug in there in their timeline to be like, okay, this is how long that shot is. Is this action the right thing right here? They'll add sound to it. That'll be driven by director and us to make sure that like, hey, we got to, and the post producer to say, hey, we got to get this stuff in here so that we can get our edit locked. And then if they're like, yeah, that we're signed off on that in that grayscale world where, it's just a rough model. It's like, yeah, that's going to work for timing. We're already developing that asset to make it look great in the background.
Right. But
that'll inform like, okay, it's go. Let's create this camera. Let's create this car. Let's get this Godzilla stomp in it.
Gotcha. Is there anything else about the process that we should tap into?
You should realize that it's not just machines, it's people. It's highly trained, highly skilled artists across all different disciplines who've spent years refining their craft. So like the people are the most important thing. When you look at those credits and you see a mile-long visual effects credits, that is sometimes not the entire, in fact, a lot of times not the entire crew, because you're only allowed a certain amount of people you can put on based on the number of shots you've done a lot of times. So,
I didn't know that.
You might not be seeing the entire thing, and that visual effects credit in a lot of shows is gonna be pretty lengthy. So there's a ton of people from PAs to coordinators to producers to IT infrastructure. It takes an army of IT to make sure that we can do the work, because we're using a lot of computing power. But what drives that is the people who like are both like have a technical brain and a creative mind to be able to understand I know what I got to get to. How do we get there technically?
Right. Would you say that
CG artists? Yeah.
I love that you said that, because that is, it's kind of like anything that works well and works seamlessly, like it's like everything's underneath it. You just see the well executed shot, the enhanced moment of whatever the script might have called for, or whatever epiphany was had by the people collaborating. But then there's so much underneath to get that to happen, let alone the technical shit. So yeah,
it's the people.
Yeah. Would you say that you are probably in your position because you're probably more of a people person, and are there folks in this world who are kind of really just into the computer, and do
for sure.
a great job, but like you're able to kind of move through both of those worlds and move back and forth?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, we all have our strengths. Mine has, just you said, I can get into a room and feel comfortable talking to people. A lot of our artists, that this is what they do. They put on your podcast feed and they get into it, and they're just like, they're moving around and creating shots, whether they're 2D artists or CG artists. But it takes a very specific brain to be able to, to do that. And they have training. So there are those who, I'm in my position because of that. Yes.
Yeah.
But I think that there's no, like, we all have our roles to play. Right. And without those folks who just tune out the world and just look at the shot,
right,
these shots can't get created.
Right. So now I got a couple kind of more general questions. I hope folks have a better understanding of what you're doing in the process and also how to approach the process. I know I'll speak for myself. There were definitely more things than I had ever done where I was like, here's what I'm envisioning. It was kind of leading with that, and not like, yeah, I know that's going to work out and it's going to be like this and that. It was a lot of like, well, what's the best way to get there and this and that, which, is a level of collaboration that is great, that sometimes can get lost when you're doing something that you just know how to do from muscle memory. Mm-hmm. So I think it also ends up challenging you as a director to rethink, some of the things. I mean, a lot of it too, it was like not only the conversation with you, but then with the stunt coordinator, and I'm getting all these good ideas, and it's like, oh shit, that's fucking better than what I was thinking. Like, yeah, okay, let's do that. Yeah. So that's what's great when you open yourself up to everyone's expertise. I'll ask you from all the work you've done, what's been your most challenging, shot or sequence to create? And yeah, whatever that answer might be.
They're all challenging in their own way. I'd rather probably just put it as like, what are some of my favorite things?
Okay.
I think working on Invasion for Apple, the show that was on Apple Plus, that was fun because I was living in New York, and, we were recreating the 59th Street Bridge. And so I got to go up on the 59th Street Bridge in the middle of the night when they shut it down for us. Wow. And we took a plate car up on there and shot green screen driving plates. And then I got out there with LiDAR to be able to scan the bridge for a specific portion that we were going to build practically, that then we had to build off of.
That's amazing.
Then got up on a hotel near there and shot a huge wide HDRI pano of the city to use as a matte painting that we dropped in that we were then going to black out. So like that was really rewarding because it was like really busy on the day, took a ton of planning and prep, and then got to be in some cool locations. Like, who gets to stand in the middle of the Queensboro Bridge at 3 a.m. by yourself, just like this? It's like, what's going on?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of like, I'm sure this is not the case, but I'm thinking of like, you come back with this great thing and some asshole director's like, okay. And you're like, they shut down the bridge. I was on the, you're like, hey, can you make it more like this? Or I can't see the Statue of Liberty,
Yeah. That does happen. But in this case, I got lucky because everyone, like, you know what New York should look like. I know what it should look like. So I'm building it. And I'm building it to real life. Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, yeah, that's awesome. Well, maybe, okay, I don't know if this kind of tethers onto that, but what's a sequence that you kind of reference as like, this blew me away? Whether it was anything that you did or a film that you've seen and you're like, man, that's like the high level mark of VFX and whether it's in today's time or contextually, 1982, that was amazing.
I mean, Star Wars is amazing. Obviously, like you gotta. That's some of the people who developed the technology, like understanding their history there, what went into doing that when it didn't exist before, and they're figuring it out, or it existed. Visual effects has existed in some form or fashion since the beginning of film, but it just hadn't been called that. This is the first time. Personally, my favorite stuff, and it's not like not the most the thing that probably people point to is Ghostbusters is like the thing that got me excited about visual effects when I was a kid. And then obviously Jurassic Park. But, you know, looking at recent stuff, I love action sequences. So like the John Wick glass building sequence, the motorcycle chase on the Verrazano, that stuff, I know how much visual effects went into it just from people who worked on it, but also just watching breakdowns. And those are really great things. And then, you know, there's the invisible effects that we don't necessarily see. I appreciate a lot. There's, it's hard. Those are kind of just some things that jump to the front of my mind right now.
All right. I had one more question before we round third, but now I have two. How many projects can you supervise at one time?
So in my role here, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm the head of studio and senior VFX supervisor. So I am supervising a show myself, but also have a team of supervisors that, you know, I've helped us, you know, get the work awarded, and they're taking it over. And we go along as a team at the beginning, and then they fully take it over, and they're the person that takes it all the way to the finish line.
Gotcha.
So, you know, you'll see probably have more. It looks like I have more credits, but a lot of it is helping to facilitate others in their career to land the jobs and to get on it and make sure that they're the right fit for it creatively and as a personality too. And so I kind of have my head in a bunch of different projects as a head of studio at any given time because I need to manage the studio and what's going on. But personally, I only ever do one at a time because it's just with family and running a studio, and that's a lot right there.
Right. Plus, you got that good vinyl collection back there. You got to have time to listen to that. Okay, and then all right. Before we round third, what excites you most about the future of VFX? And I'll also throw in, I don't know if you have an answer, but what scares you the most? Because I just consider like all this AI, you know, and stuff that's happening now. Like there are people who are like, yeah, it's great, but it's also like that can be like you could. I was just on Twitter, like, you know, and Instagram, and there's like people toying around making fake images and headlines of news events, and I'm like, I know that's not real, but like that can go in a very weird direction.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I can just jump into AI. I mean, again, as it relates to storytelling with AI, I just view it as a tool. I don't think that AI is going to replace film crews. I don't think that AI can replace the artists who do it. It's a tool. At least that's my hope. So I guess that also scares me. But, you know, for me, it's the funny thing about AI is that like, we're just kind of just barely starting to see it pop up. Because I think there's going to be a lot of lawsuits that go into it, and because each AI needs learning material, and where does that learning material come from, and what is it? Are we referencing a Hitchcock film to inform this thing that we're building? Okay, well, are those images from a Hitchcock film going into that learning model?
Right.
And is that the thing that's creating the neural model to build this scene, whatever that might be? Is that copyright infringement? So that's the thing that's like also interesting. What's going to shake out in terms of like the ethics of it all?
Right. Yeah, it's almost like, so it sounds like in what we're talking about, it feels like people kind of stealing SDRI and LiDAR to make something.
Yeah, it's possible.
As a metaphor, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing that scares me is the murky ethics of it. Because, you know, a lot of people, you know, we all care about our crafts, and a lot of people who created this material that's being used to drive these models put a lot of thought, a lot of hard work, a lot of hours into it. And so that both is exciting and scary because, in terms of concepting, if I can come up with an image right now that feels fully refined to show to someone, that's amazing.
Right.
But what was used to create that? I don't know. The thing that excites
me. People
me,
are lazy also.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but I remember I shared a business plan one time, and then I started getting random people ask me to review their business plan. I was like, this is mine, because it just like went around within a kind of circle, and people were just changing the information. And I'm like, you got to do more than that, man,
Yeah.
But that's just human nature to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Path of least resistance and least effort.
Yeah, people like the shortcuts.
But that's another interview.
It is.
All right.
The thing that excites me personally is building a team, a visual effects team.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are my people. They're lovely human beings who work incredibly hard, and it takes so many people to pull off this work, especially in the timelines that we have and the schedules we have.
Right.
So like that's the thing that excites me, is continuing to lead a team at this company. So
right. That's awesome, man. Well, now here are the final questions. 3 traits that you think are required to make it in this industry we call our own.
Got to have a great attitude. Can't be an asshole. I think critical thinking and empathy. I think, when I think about other departments and what we do to pull this together when it comes to physical production,
right.
I always try to lead with empathy of like trying to understand like, okay, what's that department got to do, and trying to get to know their job enough so that I can anticipate like, is what I'm asking for in visual effects like completely needed, or is that it's a quality of life would be nice to have moment. And so leading with empathy, I think kind of makes you a better creative partner, and understanding how much effort a director is putting forward and trying to match that effort is also important. And that's part of the empathetic side. I think those 3 things.
That's awesome, man. Anything I haven't asked you that you'd want to share to make sure people understand about the process or the art form?
I can't. Just know that there's a lot of good people making the work.
Yeah.
Nobody gets to see them. There's armies of visual effects artists throughout the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. This has been great. I love getting into the craft, and I've learned some stuff today, plenty of it. I'm sure folks listening will as well. And any show in particular for folks to look out for coming from Fuse or from you?
We are finishing up a couple features right now. I think I can say, we Extraction 2, I think.
All right.
We got a Netflix feature coming out. And there's a lot cooking. There's a lot happening. So we're always creating. It's exciting.
I love it. Well, look forward to working with you again, man.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'm excited to see what you're doing.
Oh, there is one thing.
Yeah, what is it?
You were there for one of my favorite on-set moments of my entire life, and that was Last OG. Being on set with Rakim the God.
Oh yeah, come on, man.
That was
he's so reserved too. Like you're kind of like, oh man, you're like super cool and laid back, which I guess is expected. But yeah, man, no, that's like, there's certain folks you work with, and you're like, I'm going to give you your flowers, but I'm going to like take it down a notch.
Yeah.
You don't need to look at me like this fucking guy. Yeah. But yeah, no, man, I remember I had the cassette tape of Paid in Full, and I just listened to it over and over and over again to the point I probably memorized like half of it in like a day.
Yeah, I can remember my sister bumping it in the Subaru.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, that was the last time we worked together. Hopefully we get to work together again soon.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate your time. All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
What's up, people? This is Pete Chatmon. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter via @PeteChatmon. Follow the pod on Facebook on our Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon official page, and hit up our mailbag with questions, suggestions, or hey, donations if you're feeling like it via letsshootwithpetechapman@gmail.com. And just in case you need to know how to spell it, that's Pete with the last name Chatmon. All right, folks, that was episode 47. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned and tune in next week for, of course, episode 48. But the information I have for you is not the number, but the guest. It'll be starring my man, Charles Murray, who you may know from Luke Cage. Currently, he's the showrunner on Outer Range. He's a writer, director, producer. If you saw True Story on Netflix, another great show with Kevin Hart and Wesley Snipes, really got to get into the nitty-gritty of all those jobs and his journey from Indiana to Hollywood and how he really carved out a unique position for himself as a storyteller. So in the meantime, as always, y'all, stay safe, spread love, and keep creating. And I will check in with you next week. Peace.